As the war into Europe did not go as fast as it did in the Middle East, on the political level some pieces were being moved. Countries like Holland expanded several military corps. As it was more than likely that World War Z would still continue for at least 2 years or more, many politicians thought that an educational reform was in order. Children growing up in this world should be taught about the zombie and its dangers. Besides this, treaties were being created to strengthen the bonds between neighboring countries like Belgium and Germany. With the sudden retreat of the zombies, India managed to win a lot of the land back, but it had lost most of its population and the zombie virus spread rapidly among the few survivors. In northwestern Africa, Dutch troops were in the process of closing up unsecured land as they reached for the east when they saw a golden opportunity. Though in some places the zombies had started to show signs of aggression again, across the Russian border there were entire areas where the humans could push southward. The same counted for the Ukraine that pushed east thanks to the help of many different countries. Seeing as they were on the brink of being wiped out mere months ago, a set resource focus was of the utmost importance to get the gears of the country moving again. It seemed that a majority of the zombies had run down the lost souls who were no more. The heroics in fighting would not be forgotten about by the rest of the world. The Ukrainian push was halted as the zombies started to spread out again, with the lost souls being now wiped out. But the real heroics were shown by the Greeks and Bulgarians, who not only managed to hold their land, but were now pushing the zombies back in the name of Turkey. The war would need the input of all European countries. Chancellor Schröder aimed for a closer cooperation between the countries, as the slowed down horde did seem to boost morale. In Africa, almost all unsecured land had been checked except for a small area alongside the coast. Rwanda managed to bounce back from their shattered spearhead assault earlier. In India, Vajpayee pleaded for foreign help. At this moment, their military might was nothing. Their infrastructure was nothing. In fact, their population was almost nothing. India had turned to a desolate and disease-ridden plague land. In Turkey, an army not only led by the Greeks and Bulgarians, but many others too, was pushing the massive horde of the zombies back towards Istanbul. Some were even so hopeful to think that the city would be retaken in the next coming weeks. The Russians and Ukrainians were trying to get rid of the zombies along the border of Belarus. If they could connect the Ukrainian and Russian territories again, it would make the defense a lot easier. Now that it felt that the humans could start putting pressure on the enemy, Putin returned to the familiar path of death from above. Though in China, a small group of zombies was able to push past the front, reinforcing troops could easily handle the situation and get rid of them. In Africa, the one area that had not been secured yet housed several zombies that made their way through the thick jungle and spread out along the coast. But just as in China, though the undead managed to gain some ground, it would not take long before they would be rooted out by the combined forces. The amount of zombies that were stuck in Istanbul was multiple millions. Nevertheless, with swiftness and finesse, the European armies swept the streets clean and moved further a couple of miles every day. Though the Ukraine managed to push back, the area around Sevastopol had fallen, as this lay in a position that was more difficult to defend once the undead had sunk their teeth into it. As part of the armies in Africa took care of the expanding zombies at the coast, the rest pushed north, with Rwanda gaining more territory over time. With the speed that they were advancing, zombies got surrounded in small pockets but were not posing a real threat. The Russian front moved slowly south, relieving some pressure from countries like Finland that were preparing for war in the previous months. In China, the zombies that headed past the front had been taken care of, and the forces appointed to the task returned to the line as well to continue the advance. Experts believe that at this point in time, the zombie horde was around 40 million strong, with the GDA being responsible for the death of over 14 million already. Especially the battles fought around the Greek and Bulgarian border took part in this number. Another pocket of zombies was surpassed in Africa, but the German forces surrounding it would soon close it. It did show a sign of recklessness with the breakneck speed at which the armies were progressing. The front line in Europe and Asia was ridiculous in its length and size. There were multiple areas where the GDA lost clashes, and then there were those where they won. It was difficult to tell if the front line made progress in the short term. As expected, in Africa, the unsecured area had been surrounded and now needed to be rooted out at the stem. With those zombies being taken care of, all of the GDA troops at that location moved northeast to reinforce. Istanbul had been liberated and retaken, ensuing a massive victory for the GDA. But of course the troops did not stop there, as now the rest of Turkey needed to be liberated as well. In Africa, it became apparent that the rushing maneuvers of the armies were because they wanted to connect Saudi Arabia and Rwanda in the north. If Africa could entirely be secured, all the focus would shift towards fighting in the Middle East again, giving the UN troops a good advantage. But then in the beginning of August of 2005, word got out that India had fallen. Even though they managed to get a lot of land back, the virus had spread throughout the land, killing the majority of its population and government. The soldiers that were still stuck in other parts of the world were combined with armies from other nations. Because of this, initially the GDA lost a huge amount of land in several parts of Africa. But as most of these parts were zombie-free, they should be able to be secured fairly easily. With India gone, it could create an opening for the zombies to attack from a different angle, but at the same time could also be an opportunity for China to flank as well. China also managed to secure a small dock in northwest Africa to start expanding from there. The assault in Turkey had stumbled, as the northern part of the line exceeded the south by quite a bit. Spanish, Chinese, and Dutch troops all zigzagged their way through Africa, claiming lost Indian territory for themselves. Europe, at that moment, was mostly focused on building an infrastructure able enough to support the migration of Central European units to the east. With new claims on African soil, some of the dominant forces in the area became Holland, Rwanda, and Mozambique. Instead of moving south towards India from their own line, China sent a naval force to secure parts of the southern territories. The front line in Turkey evened itself out, and with the Greeks at the wheel, they mowed their way through zombies and reclaimed land for neighboring Turkey. Russia and the Ukraine had tightened the area in front of Belarus, making sure they were the dominant forces doing the pushback. The thick forest made it not as quick as it went in Turkey, but nevertheless, there was movement in the line being pushed east. But a month later, a lot more zombies had grouped up in the Turkish region, pushing the Greeks back by a huge amount, giving them the first row of defeats in the last couple of days. China made great headway in the Indian territories, as they barely stumbled upon any zombie resistance. Aside from another few areas around the coast, Africa had almost completely been resecured. What looked so glooming a mere year before now had turned into a ray of hope. It would create a whole new bulk of political issues if the war against the zombies was won, but until that time came, no one asked questions. At both the Ukrainian and Russian front, there were areas where the zombies sometimes managed to break through. The advantage that the Ukraine had was that the other countries from Central Europe were always in pursuit to reinforce and close the gap. Christmas of 2005 finally returned to a joyful event for many in Europe. Where so many were afraid it would fall the year before, now many felt this was the turn of the tide. With new advancements in 2006 planned, like new tanks, artillery, planes, and more, surely they would push the zombies back. It even made people feel at ease when some governments, like the American one, refrained for a while from a military focus and instead tackled the economy for a more efficient resource gain. Where some people thought that Europe would not see the dawn of 2006, it was a relief to many to start off the new year full of life and motivation. Word got around that scientists were on the brink of creating an antidote for the virus, meaning that though the war would still continue, that at least no more countries and people could get infected. The Chinese and Mongolian scientists were mostly to thank for this, as their first tests proved hopeful. China's forces would connect to take an Indian territory with the main area in the next coming weeks. In the last half year, the UN population lost 1.5 million men in the fight with the undead, but were able to kill a massive amount of 5 million zombies. It was estimated that another 20 million or so needed to be taken down before the war would be won. Rwanda and Saudi Arabia managed to connect, thereby securing Africa once more. Now the fight would move towards the north and east, and it did not take long before Jerusalem and more territories that were held for so long by the lost souls were reclaimed as well. The front at the Middle East would soon push towards Europe and Central Asia as well, making it difficult to hold, and therefore a focus was set on just securing the line for the moment. Country leaders that were directly engaged in warfare with the undead continued their focuses on military modernization, while countries on other continents, far from the danger, now felt secure enough to start looking inward again to deal with the country itself. Kostas Simitis of Greece could not be prouder of his troops showing the world the Greek spirit. With the few setbacks over the past months, It was important now that Greece did keep a stable availability of resources for its war machine. And so the world continued. With a new united front at the Middle East, combat continued the same as it did for the past several months. In Europe, the troops fought in the dense and snowy forests, and in China, the connection between former India had finally been made. In Turkey, the rumbling confrontation with the zombies waited on as human spirits were high. 20 million zombies still stood between the armies at all the different fronts. It would still be one hell of a bloody fight to get rid of those. But the GDA and its people were now more confident than ever that they would come out victorious.